The next Friday morning, at Juryogi High School, which was different from Moo's school, a student was standing guard at the restroom entrance, refusing to let anyone in, even those who were about to burst and desperately needed to go. Inside the restroom, a big guy was grilling another student, asking him how much money he had made. That student was the same thief Moo had beaten up the other day. Nervously, the boy pulled out some cash and said it was only 20,000 won. The big guy, who looked eerily similar to Moo's original form, same build, same face, got furious and yelled that it wasn't even close to what he'd asked for. His name was Yang Zhou, and he seemed to be the top bully of their school. The little thief, clearly one of Yang Zhou's lackeys, started whining about how Kang had interfered and messed up all his hard work. Hearing Kang's name made Yang Zhou completely lose his cool. He threw a heavy punch at the wall, his face turning red with frustration as he couldn't handle the idea of some random guy constantly ruining things for him. Yang Zhou wanted to catch Kang and punish him, but since he couldn't track him down easily, he ordered the little boy to gather everyone under his command immediately to pursue him. The scene shifted to Saturday evening, where Moo and Kang were walking through the streets together. Kang opened up, saying how grateful he was. He admitted that he used to fight recklessly, always lashing out and beating looking thug people up for no real reason. But after meeting Moo, something had changed in him. For the first time, he realized he could actually enjoy fighting, not in a blind, violent way, but with purpose and control. Always looking for an excuse to fight, Moo replied, "Why don't you just fight me now instead of wasting your time searching for random people to beat up, so both of us can enjoy fighting?" Kang, however, didn't actually plan to fight Moo since he wasn't the type of person he was looking for. Still, he promised they'd have a rematch one day, in a fair battle, but not right now. While Kang was responding, Moo suddenly noticed smoke coming from a distance. Kang noticed it too and looked surprised. Out of curiosity, he sniffed the air and it smelled like cigarette smoke. He couldn't help but wonder how many people were smoking at the same time to create such thick smoke. Without wasting time, he quickly put on his mask and then glasses, figuring it was probably time to meet their first target of the day. Without hesitation, and as always, Kang jumped into action, using the dense smoke to sneak closer unnoticed. Two guys were standing in front while more were hanging out deeper in the alley. One of the guys in front spotted Kang before the others did, but assumed he was just a passerby. With an arrogant tone, he demanded Kang hand over his wallet. At that moment, Kang knew for sure he'd found the right target. Without a second thought, he threw a punch straight to the guy's face. Seeing Kang's appearance and this action, the other guy suddenly recognized him as the famous bully hunter and shouted in alarm. His yelling immediately caught the attention of the rest of the group, making Kang realize he was now up against at least 5 more people. He hadn't expected to run into so many bullies at once, and that's when it hit him. He wasn't alone. He quickly called out to Moo for help. Moo, who had already covered his head with a jacket to hide his identity, was blushing with excitement at the thought of a proper fight. Kang fearlessly charged at them first, shouting for Moo to follow. But Moo just stood there, trembling, not out of fear, but from being overly excited. Same as before, he couldn't start fighting like this. He needed someone to throw the first punch at him. Just then, the guy Kang had punched earlier grabbed Moo's leg and, confused by why he was just standing there, asked if he was with Kang. The answer was obvious. And since Moo had been waiting for any excuse to start, he decided to count that as a pinch, and the first strike he needed to officially join the fight. With that, he launched into action. In less than a few minutes, the two of them had taken care of the thugs, giving them a proper and well-deserved beating. However, Moo found it all incredibly disappointing. These guys were nothing but weaklings, going down after just 1 or 2 hits. It wasn't nearly as fun or challenging as he'd hoped. Kang, on the other hand, was satisfied with the outcome. Spotting a small bag on the ground, he immediately picked it up and handed it back to its owner, the person who had been cornered and robbed by those thugs. It was a red-haired girl, already pushed to her limits, desperate to be rescued. But she wasn't just some random stranger, and Kang immediately recognized her. She was from his school, even in his class, the same girl he secretly had a crush on. Before Kang could say a word to comfort her or even get a simple thank you, several other guys showed up at the scene. Dragonling tried to warn his master, but Moo had already noticed them. These guys weren't random. They were here because one of the thugs, before getting beaten, had managed to send a message saying they'd spotted Kang. They called him Iljime, which in Korea meant someone like Robin Hood. The guy who got that message, of course, was Yang Zhou. And now, Yang Zhou and his gang had arrived, ready to punish Kang for always interfering and messing up their so-called work. Seeing them, Kang realized it was time to get serious. Without hesitation, he decided to continue the fight with his weapon. Meanwhile, Moo's disappointed expression quickly turned into one of pure excitement as he realized the fight wasn't over yet. The real fun was just about to begin. Under Yang Zhou's command, his gang charged at Kang and Moo all at once, determined to take them down by any means necessary. Kang and Moo stood their ground, calmly waiting for them to make the first move. Moo, however, was struggling to keep his emotions in check. He was so thrilled at the thought of an all-out brawl that he couldn't stop himself from drooling uncontrollably. Moo didn't wait for Kang to say anything. Without wasting a second, he charged at the group, taking them down one by one with a single strike each and moving on to the next opponent like it was a game. He knocked out 3 in a row, and just when he thought things couldn't get any more fun, a heavy slap landed across his face. Of course, it was Yangzhou. With that single and effortless move, Yangzhou had caught Mu off guard and thrown him to the ground. Looking annoyed, Yangzhou demanded to know why there were 2 Iljimaes, when, as far as he was concerned, there should only be 1. Meanwhile, a little further away from the chaos, the red-haired guy, Heijin, who had been disgusted watching Mu and Kang fight the other day, happened to be passing by. He was muttering to himself, wondering why his calls hadn't been answered. But as he walked a few steps closer, the noise from the commotion caught his attention. Curiosity got the better of him, and he couldn't resist checking out what was going on. What he saw was a mess. A bunch of guys fighting and going at each other like a pack of wild goats. Just like last time, Heijin felt disgusted after watching only a few seconds of the brawl. But just as he was about to ignore it all and walk away, something stopped him in his tracks. His eyes caught sight of the girl backed into the corner and Kang standing in front of her, ready to protect her with everything he had. For a moment, Heijin froze. Something about seeing that girl made him lose his temper entirely. The reason behind Heijin's disgust toward fights went all the way back to his childhood, back when his father was an MMA champion. To Heijin, his father was everything, someone he deeply respected and admired, the strongest person he knew. He couldn't have been prouder to call him his dad. But everything started to change when his father began using some kind of illegal drugs to get stronger. At first, it wasn't obvious, but over time, things spiraled out of control. His father became addicted, and the effects of the drugs made him lose his mind at times. Heijin was just a little kid back then. He didn't understand much about drugs or addiction, but it didn't take long for his view of his father to shatter completely. The man he once saw as his hero became a monster, turning their home into a living nightmare. His mother eventually ran away to save her own life and escape the endless beatings from her husband, but she didn't have the chance to take her kids with her. Heijin was left behind, and he wasn't alone. He had a little sister who needed his protection. With nowhere to go and no way to escape, the red-haired boy endured everything. He did everything he could to shield his sister from harm, taking the brunt of his father's outbursts. But deep down, he knew this couldn't go on forever, realizing he couldn't even survive like this. Determined to find a way out, Heijin started watching his father's matches over and over again, studying his moves and techniques. He practiced in secret, learning everything he could. Years passed, and as Heijin grew older, he eventually reached the same size as his father. One day, when Heijin was slapped across the face for no reason, he didn't hold back. Without hesitation, he punched his father. He had reached his limit. He was done living a miserable life like this, and now, he believed he had grown strong enough to finally put a stop to it. His father was completely caught off guard. It was the first time Heijin had ever dared to stand up to him, but instead of backing down, Heijin's defiance drove his father into a fit of rage. Blinded by anger, his father muttered something insane, that it was time to kill not just Heijin but his innocent little sister as well. Hearing those words made Heijin realize his father was about to cross a line that could never be undone. In that moment, Heijin lost control. Fueled by anger and fear, he did the unthinkable. He killed his father that day. Heijin had committed murder, but the court showed some sympathy for his circumstances. He was sentenced to just 1 year in a juvenile detention center. After serving his time, he returned to school, but life didn't get any easier. During his school years, Heijin was forced to work tirelessly to earn enough money to support both himself and his sister. He couldn't afford to get sick or injured. His body was his only asset, the one thing keeping their lives afloat. So, when he saw people like Mu and Kang treating their bodies recklessly, throwing themselves into fights without care, it disgusted him. But now everything felt different. This time, he couldn't look away. He couldn't ignore the situation, especially since that girl was his sister, the sister he had devoted his entire life to protecting. Her safety was at stake, and he couldn't turn a blind eye. Her name was Daljun, and she still hadn't noticed Heijin standing a little distance away. Her brother couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in this situation, but in the end, it didn't really matter. All that mattered was keeping her safe. Without paying any attention to the girl or realizing he was being watched by her brother, Yangzhou just stood there, looking confused about why there were suddenly 2 people acting like Iljimaes this time. Unfortunately, Mu had collapsed to the ground, unconscious, while the horrified dragonling nervously tried to wake him up. Thinking he was done here and ready to deal with the next Iljimae and end this nonsense, Yangzhou didn't even notice Heijin appearing behind him. Out of nowhere, with a sudden and unexpected strike, Heijin hit Yangzhou's weak spot, catching him completely off guard. Shocked, Yangzhou dropped to his knees, unable to figure out who had the nerve to attack him from behind. But that wasn't the end of it. Heijin grabbed Yangzhou's head with one hand and used all his strength to slam it into the ground, finishing off the big guy as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the dragonling was desperately trying to wake his master, shouting louder and louder. But before he could finish his task, Heijin stepped on him. Not to hurt him, but simply to walk past and get to his sister as fast as he could. Kang noticed his presence shortly after but couldn't figure out who he was or why he was there. Kang was even more baffled when, in the blink of an eye, Heijin took down 2 bullies like it was nothing. Only 2 thugs were left, and before they could react, Heijin reached them, grabbed their stunned faces, and slammed their heads against the walls beside them. When he reached Kang, Heijin gave him a cold, serious look and said they had all crossed a line they should have never even thought about. Kang quickly realized Heijin wasn't like the other thugs. He was clearly here for the girl. Panicking, Kang tried to explain himself and the reason he was there, but before he could get a word out, Daljun suddenly shouted, "Brother!" That distracted Kang, making him wonder if Daljun and this guy were actually siblings. From their looks, the answer seemed obvious, but before Kang could fully wrap his head around it, Heijin took the opportunity to attack. As a champion boxer with fast reflexes, Kang noticed Heijin's approach and threw out a random punch to defend himself, but Heijin easily dodged it and found the perfect opening to strike. Surprisingly though, instead of punching or kicking, Heijin just placed a hand on Kang and gave him a firm push, making him stumble backward without actually hurting him. Then, without wasting any time, Heijin grabbed the frightened Daljun's hand, pulling her and saying, "Pull yourself together and run with me." They started running, but before Daljun could take more than a few steps, she accidentally dropped her small blue wallet, or whatever it was, without realizing it. Heijin, however, had no time to point it out. He suddenly noticed a much bigger problem standing in their way. Blocking the exit of the alley and looking absolutely furious was Yangzhou, and this time, he wasn't messing around. Yangzhou began shouting angrily, demanding to know who Heijin was and why he suddenly showed up and ruined everything. But Heijin had no intention of answering his questions or stopping for a chat. He was ready to force his way out, but before he could make a move, someone else stepped in and did the job for him. Out of nowhere, Yangzhou was caught for the second time and punched square in the face. It was Mu. He had regained consciousness after the earlier attack and took this chance to strike back. Heijin hadn't noticed Mu until now and was momentarily confused, wondering who this guy was and where he'd come from to clear the path for him. But there was no time for questions. Heijin used the opportunity to take his sister and get them out of there. Meanwhile, Mu seemed overly thrilled to be back in the fight, excited not only to have been beaten but to dish out some hits of his own. Kang, however, scolded him, demanding to know why he had exposed his face and made himself an easy target for everyone. Back where Yangzhou was, he was struggling to even stand, disoriented and trying to figure out where the second hit had come from. He raised his dizzy head just in time to see the 2 Iljimais running off in the distance. He wasn't in any condition to stop or even chase after them, and the realization made his temper boil over. Swearing loudly, he promised himself that he would find them again, and when the time came, he would tear them apart one by one. The scene shifted to a few hours later, where Kang had sketched a simple picture of Yangzhou. He was trying to explain to Mu who that guy really was and what their next move should be. According to Kang, Yangzhou was one of the most infamous delinquents in the area. But it wasn't just him. There were 2 others like him, Kwak Do-gyeon from Gyeokugi High School and Kim Chun-gu from Hwiparam High School. Together, the 3 of them were known as Godori. Each one was the top bully in their respective school. Mu didn't know much about the other 2, only Yangzhou, and Kang didn't want to focus on them for now. He just wanted to explain the situation so Mu could better understand what was going on in the area. After introducing the top 3 delinquents, Kang mentioned that they didn't used to cause this much trouble, at least not until Yangzhou showed up and changed everything. Things had gotten so bad that members under Godori command were now extorting money from people in broad daylight. Kang also pointed out that the guys they fought earlier, before Yangzhou arrived, were probably part of the Godori gang, but not directly under Yangzhou's command. Based on everything Kang had seen and figured out so far, it seemed like Yangzhou was the key figure in the gang, and that's why he acted like the leader back then. Despite how carefully and thoroughly Kang tried to explain everything, Mu still looked lost and clueless, like he hadn't understood a single thing Kang had said from the start. He asked Kang to explain the delinquent and extortion parts again from the beginning because he couldn't remember what any of it was about. When Mu also mentioned that he didn't even know what Godori meant, Kang lost his temper. He snapped, asking if Mu even had a brain and, if he did, why it seemed like it was just for decoration and not actually working. That's when Dragonling popped out of his little hiding spot, unable to sit quietly while his lord was being insulted like that. Perching on top of Mu's head with his newly sprouted tail, he shouted at Kang and even called him a bastard. Acting overly confident again, like he was still in his original mighty form, Dragonling demanded to know how Kang dared to be so rude to God Mu. Shocked, Kang had no idea what Dragonling truly was and was completely caught off guard by his sudden appearance. He stared at him, confused, and mumbled, wondering what kind of frog could talk like that. Of course, calling him a frog didn't exactly sit well with Dragonling, who still believed he was a mighty dragon. Mu, as casual as ever, introduced Dragonling as something like his assistant or maybe a friend, which only made the situation even weirder. At this point, Kang couldn't help but feel suspicious about the whole thing going on with Mu. The way Mu seemed completely clueless about everything, even basic stuff, like the names of the days of the week, made Kang wonder if he was missing some fundamental knowledge entirely. And now, adding a walking, talking frog as his assistant? It didn't take long for Kang to form some quick conclusions about the strange mess he had gotten himself involved in. Mu was kind of impressed that a mere human like Kang had already figured out he wasn't originally human. Both of them ended up speaking their minds at the same time. Kang openly wondered if Mu was an alien, while Mu casually declared that he was a god. But to Kang, Mu looked like anything but a god. And staying true to his clueless nature, Mu immediately asked what Kang meant by alien, clearly having no idea what that was. This whole back-and-forth conversation was happening in President Kim's house. She couldn't help but wonder why they were even there while she was being forced to mend Mu's ripped-up shirt for him. A few minutes later, her annoyed expression softened into a happier one when Dragonling plopped down on her feet and started playing with her phone. To simplify things for Mu's tiny brain, as Kang put it, he explained that, whether he was a god or an alien, their target for now was the big guy who slapped Mu and knocked him down before Mu managed to punch him later. Kang was clearly blaming Yangzhou for everything that had happened to Daljun, and just thinking about what she'd gone through made Kang's blood boil with anger. Mu, on the other hand, finally understood who they were supposed to focus on. He was oddly kind of happy about having had a real fight, even looking back on the unique experience of getting beaten up by Yangzhou. But deep down, Mu also knew the truth. There was no way he could take on Yangzhou in a proper, fair fight, especially not in his current state. The size difference alone made it a nearly impossible challenge for him. Mu suddenly felt excited again. The thought of fighting someone stronger than him felt like the best challenge he could ever have, but reality hit him hard a moment later as he realized he could easily get knocked down again. To avoid that, he knew he needed to train harder, much harder than before. Kang agreed, pointing out that Mu was no match for Yangzhou and suggesting he come train at Kang's gym. However, Mu immediately shot down the idea, saying he didn't like Kang's training style, which focused only on bare-knuckle fighting. Mu believed he needed a completely different kind of training, something more diverse, more intense, and way rougher than anything he'd done before. Just then, Dragonling, who had been playing with Kim's phone, suddenly perked up. He jumped down and crawled toward Mu, excitedly declaring that he had found exactly what Mu was looking for. It was a video, probably online, showing a challenge in an underground arena. The video featured an undefeated fighter with a 13-win streak, someone who usually took down his opponents in just seconds. The girl streaming the fight asked if anyone else dared to face this guy. To make things even more interesting, she announced a reward of 1 million won for the winner. Both Mu and Kang were intrigued, watching the video closely and listening to what the girl was saying. What caught their attention the most, however, was when Kang recognized the undefeated fighter in the arena. He confirmed that the guy was one of the Ghidorah gang members. Mu, wanting to be sure, asked Kang for more confirmation. "Are you saying he's part of the gang you mentioned earlier? The one we need to deal with?" Kang nodded, confirming it. That was all Mu needed to hear. He immediately set his next goal. He would use this chance to train hard, defeat Yangzhou, and after that, he would take down Ghidorah gang one by one. That was on Earth, but things looked way more serious in the divine realm. A powerful magical attack had struck the domain of the Earth god. The attack was devastating, and from the way it hit, it was obvious Lucifer was behind it. He was throwing everything he had into breaking through Earth's barrier, determined to get his shot at finishing off Mu. This time, he even pushed himself beyond his limits, convinced he'd managed to create a crack in the barrier. He knew if he didn't take advantage of this moment while Mu was still weak, he'd end up in a life-or-death situation once Mu regained his strength. As the smoke and dust around the mini-Earth began to clear, Lucifer couldn't take his eyes off it, desperate to see the results. But to his disbelief, the mini-Earth was completely unharmed, not even a scratch on its barrier, even after Lucifer's ultimate move. As expected, Lucifer couldn't stand the sight of his failure. He was sure the barrier should have been shattered by now. What made him even angrier was the memory of that day when Mu had effortlessly, with just a flick of his finger, broken through the barrier of Lucifer's planet and tossed that ugly boy inside it like some worthless object, without even caring about Lucifer's opinion. The fact that he couldn't do the same, no matter how hard he tried, made Lucifer feel like he was going to explode with rage. The situation on Earth wasn't much better for Yangzhou either. He was burning with anger, just like Lucifer. Unable to keep his cool and maybe trying to calm himself down a little, he started punching and kicking the door in front of him while shouting and cursing at the Iljimays for unfairly beating and humiliating him. He stood there, struggling to not think about it, at least for now. But then it became obvious. The door he was attacking was a bathroom door, and some poor guy was trapped inside. The guy freaked out so badly that he lost control 3 times before realizing what was going on. Yangzhou eventually walked out of the public restroom, feeling defeated. All he could think about was how he'd been beaten up and humiliated by a bunch of weaklings. And to top it off, he hadn't gained anything from the day. The guy who had been waiting outside for him, the same small guy from before, tried to cheer him up. With a smug grin, he pulled out something he'd swiped, Daljun's blue wallet, which she'd dropped without realizing it. Yangzhou snatched the wallet and started shaking it up and down to see what was inside. A few measly coins fell to the ground, and that's when Yangzhou lost it. He thought the little thief was mocking him by offering such a pathetic amount of money. What he didn't notice right away was that Daljun's ID card was also inside the wallet and had fallen onto the floor near the coins. It was her school identification card, and apart from the school's name, it had her photo, her full name, and other details on it. Yangzhou picked up the card and stared at it carefully. After a few seconds, his mood completely shifted. A sly grin spread across his face as he realized he could make good use of this information to finally get back at those damn Iljumes. That day ended without much explanation, and the next morning, Mu and Dragonling were walking through the streets. Dragonling was trying to help guide him to his destination by reading the map President Kim had drawn for them earlier. It seemed like Mu was heading toward the arena, the place Dragonling had shown him in the video the other day. Before long, as a guy with a dog was about to pass by them, Dragonling accidentally let out a small fart. Neither Mu nor the guy seemed to notice and just kept walking, completely unaware of what had happened. But for the dog, with its sharp sense of smell, it was impossible to ignore. The moment that little fart reached its nose, the dog snapped. It completely lost control, going on a rampage. Whatever that fart contained or however it smelled, it clearly hit the dog in the worst way possible. Without hesitation, the dog lunged at Dragonling and gave him a solid bite on the butt, like it was trying to punish him and seal his exit so he wouldn't do something that gross again. Once the dog had delivered its justice, it calmed down and let Dragonling go, but not without leaving him with a lesson he'd never forget. As they started to part ways, both Dragonling and the dog shot angry glares at each other. Dragonling, confused and still sore, couldn't figure out why he'd suddenly been attacked by such a lowly creature. Assuming the dog was just crazy, he vowed to get his revenge someday. A few minutes later, with Dragonling's guidance, they finally reached their destination. The little girl from the video was sitting at a table, reviewing participants and either accepting or rejecting them based on their fighting experience. When it was Mu's turn to be evaluated, the girl immediately noticed he was a high schooler because of his distinctive school uniform. She even recognized which school he was from, but just to confirm, she asked if she was correct. Before Mu could respond, Dragonling popped his head out of his hiding spot and whispered for him to just say yes and agree with her. Clueless as always, Mu did exactly what Dragonling told him to do. The girl then moved on to her next question, asking what kind of fighting experience Mu had that qualified him to participate in the arena. Once again, Mu had no idea what she was talking about or what she meant by experience. Sensing his confusion, the girl tried to explain further. She was asking about any kind of fighting background, like boxing, wrestling, martial arts, or even street fighting. This time, Mu finally understood what she meant. He paused, started counting on his fingers, and looked like he was trying really hard to calculate something. With Dragonling's help and using every ounce of brainpower he had, Mu confidently announced he had 3 million years of all sorts of fighting experience. The people standing in line behind him immediately burst into laughter, thinking he was just some clueless idiot trying to be funny. Unlike others, the girl in charge of accepting participants actually liked Mu's answer and decided to let him join the fight. She then asked for the entry fee, which was 50,000 won for those who passed the interview. From behind, Dragonling pulled out some money from who knows where and handed it to Mu. If anyone was curious where he got the cash, you would probably figure out that the sneaky little lizard was a pro thief who had taken advantage of Kim's trust to swipe her wallet. However, since neither Mu nor Dragonling could count money properly, they didn't realize they only had 46,000 won, 4,000 short of the required fee. Luckily, the girl seemed to like Mu, so she let it slide and gave him a discount for the remaining amount. With that taken care of, Mu stepped aside to make room for the next person in line to be interviewed. As Mu walked away, something caught his attention, making him stop and turn his head to get a better look. It was a big guy in a green hat and jacket, casually leaning against a column, lamppost, or whatever it was. Mu stared at him for a few seconds, observing him closely. Something about the guy's appearance and physique grabbed his attention. From the sheer size and definition of the boy's muscles, which Mu could easily spot even at a glance, it was obvious he was someone who trained seriously. Mu wasn't entirely sure though, as he hadn't seen the man's face, but based on his overall appearance, Mu suspected it might be the same guy Kang had mentioned, the one from Godori. The guy had completely captured Mu's full attention, but strangely enough, it seemed like that boy, despite standing out so much, wasn't paying any attention to his surroundings at all. The situation got a little weird a few minutes later when the event was about to start, and the guy finally revealed his face. Turns out, it wasn't a guy at all. It was actually a girl. Or at least a guy who looked way too much like a girl. The little girl in charge of streaming the event decided to kick things off with an introduction of the undefeated champion. Both the champion and the announcer girl stood in the center of the arena, while the others formed a wide circle around them, keeping some distance. The short girl tried to hype things up, shouting the champion's name, Whistlego, a fighter with an impressive record of 13 wins in a row. And then, of course, there was Mu. Acting clueless as always, he stepped forward like an idiot, completely unaware that this wasn't supposed to be a one-on-one fight just between him and the champion. He planted himself in the middle of the arena, got into a fighting stance, and declared he was ready to start the battle. His unexpected behavior caught everyone off guard, including the short girl who was trying to run the show. But Mu, as usual, didn't seem to notice the shocked reactions around him. Instead, with a goofy smile on his face, he announced that he was about to start the fight right now. And unlike his usual approach of waiting for a preemptive attack, Mu decided to go for it first this time. In his mind, standing in the middle of the arena meant both sides were already good to go. But before he could even make a move, the short girl rushed over and stopped him dead in his tracks. She looked completely baffled, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was clear she thought Mu was about to ruin the whole event. Rolling her eyes and clearly frustrated, she tried to explain what was going on, just in case Mu's IQ wasn't high enough to figure it out on his own. She reached into her small pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and held it up for Mu to see, explaining that he needed to follow the rules and couldn't just jump in and fight the champion like that. The paper showed the tournament format, where everyone had to participate in battles first, and the winners of each match would face off until only one person was left standing. It seems Mu decided to cooperate, and almost an hour later, 3 battles had already finished, and the winners had been decided. Now, it was finally Mu's turn. He stood in the spot he had been waiting for all along, ready to fight. His opponent, as fate would have it, turned out to be the same guy whose dog had attacked Dragonling earlier. The little girl hosting the event once again tried to hype things up and make the battle more exciting. She introduced Mu as the self-proclaimed fighter with 3 million years of experience, a statement that, of course, no one believed. Then she introduced his opponent as a master of Chinese martial arts, a polite and composed guy, unlike his chaotic dog. Dragonling was watching the match from a distance, his eyes darting around as he overheard people placing bets on the fighters. He felt a sense of pride and excitement knowing that his lord's match was finally about to begin after what felt like forever. But just as he was getting into it, his attention was pulled away by something else. On the other side of the arena, a dog was barking nonstop, making such a racket that it was hard to ignore. Even with all the noise and commotion around, the constant barking was so irritating that it managed to cut through the crowd's excitement and found a way to annoy Dragonling. The dog seemed strangely familiar to the Dragonling. Its crazy-looking face and wild behavior practically screamed its identity. After a moment, the Dragonling finally remembered. It was the same dog that had bitten his butt earlier when they were on their way here. Fueled by the memory of that painful attack, he suddenly leaped out of his nest, not with a small, simple jump, but with such force and height that people thought a bird was flying overhead. In the blink of an eye, he landed on the ground, not clumsily like a lizard, but with the grace of a skilled master. His landing was near Mu, startling his lord, who couldn't help but wonder what was going on. But the Dragonling was too furious to respond to Mu's question. His focus was locked on the dog. It was as if they could understand each other's language when the Dragonling challenged the dog to a fair fight in the arena. To everyone's surprise, the dog seemed to understand him. Shaking its head wildly, it broke free from its collar. The next moment, the dog dashed forward, weaving through the crowd, and stopped in the middle of the arena. That's when its owner, the Chinese guy, finally realized everyone was talking about his dog. He had no idea why his pet had suddenly run over there, looking so fired up. Unlike everyone else, the interviewer girl found the whole thing fascinating. Not only did she choose not to stop the fight, but she also enthusiastically announced a rare double battle event, owners against each other and their pets against each other. Of course, it was all for the sake of drawing more viewers to her stream. Again and more dramatically, she introduced Mu as the 3 million year fighter, and his opponent as the Chinese martial arts international student. For the second part of the showdown, she dubbed it as the little new sprouted tail lizard versus the Chinese mad dog.